To think is not your real nature. Chapter 8. The Birth of Man. The natural history of man is a register of facts and their interpretation in the form of theories. The seeker after the truth of himself is not interested in discussions about the theories. He clings to the facts and takes the liberty of interpreting them according to his own light. We take for granted the statement of the rishis of ancient India that before anything else was, there was absolute consciousness. It is in and beyond everything that is and will be when everything else has disappeared. We consider as the biological means of contact between that absolute consciousness and living beings their brain and nervous system, whose development means a growing capacity of partaking more and more of that absolute consciousness. We also agree with the statement of the natural science that man, as a biological phenomenon, having gone through many previous steps, is now at the highest rung of the scale of animal life. But where, in the course of his so-called evolution, is the moment when he left the line of his animal ancestors to become human? It seems that natural science has never found an adequate answer to this question. To the scientist, man is still merely a mammal, as all his highly developed human capacities can be retraced to his animal heritage, the difference being only one of degree. As natural science teaches, animal life in its earliest stage is completely ruled by instinct, an inborn mechanism of reaction, regulating its primitive needs and activities. Living by instinct alone implies that the creature has no consciousness either of himself or of its surroundings. Still, there is the taking in of food, there is procreation, both of which grant, without doubt, even in this earliest stage, a sense of satisfaction, which must be felt consciously or not at all. Thus, feeling is the first stirring of consciousness within, that simple network of nerves which precedes the genesis of the brain in higher forms of life. Moreover, these same most primitive living beings do not take in all and everything for food, but seem to choose. Thus, there must be a sense of dim discrimination even in their instinct. Is not discriminating and choosing the basic feature of thinking, kept up even to the highest stage of scientific and technical thinking? The last of the faculties latent in the stage of instinct behavior is the will, being nothing else than the inborn urge for acting. As urge, it is pure instinct, which means unconscious to the creature. When it becomes conscious, it is will. By the application of feeling, thinking, and acting during numberless ages, those earliest forms of life develop that brain and nervous system meant to be the biological mechanism of conscious reacting. But we can find no definite borderline between human and animal life, neither physically, physiologically, nor in their ways of behaving, not even in his faculty of ESP, or extrasensory perception, since this too shows itself clearly in animals, where it has been the object of experimental examination. But let us drop these strange facts for the time being and start anew from another angle. We jump to the rich magic culture of the Ice Age, dated about 50,000 years back. The way of life is still the same as millions of years before. The tribesmen are hunters and fishers. Their wives collect wild fruits and vegetables. But there is something more. Only recently, in the beginning of the 20th century, huge natural underground caves were discovered accidentally in Spain and France. The walls of these caves are covered with the most wonderful drawings of the wild animals of that time, 50,000 years back. Bears and stags, wild horses and bison. All of them are hit by arrows or boomerang, and in some places there are men hunting them. Evidently, these pictures, thousands of them in more than 100 caves, represent the amazing artistic skill of the magicians of hunting tribes, with the purpose of conjuring up success for planned hunting trips. But for whom was the magician summoning up? Not only by his paintings, but also by his magic dance, the footprints of which are still to be seen where there is mud ground in the deep recesses of some of these natural caves. These marvelous pictures represent the correspondence of the living with their deceased, with the purpose of asking for hunting assistance. The people of the Ice Age considered those big caves as the dwelling realm, the Hades of their deceased. Here we touch the thread which will lead us back to a widely disputed problem: the origin of religion. To find the answer, we have to go backwards another 50,000 years. Those people of the European Ice Age are considered as the immediate ancestors of the present white-skinned race. There were other types of primitive men before them. The latest of them about 50,000 years ago before the Ice Age, and they were called the Neanderthals, after the spot in Germany where the first skeleton of his kind was discovered. It is known that he was already acquainted with the use of fire and that he buried his dead. This last fact seemed to allow the conclusion that he already had some ideas about religion in the form of a life after death, particularly because there were found in the burial places foodstuffs, weapons, and other personal belongings of the deceased. However, we cannot accept this conclusion when we hold on to the leading idea that the so-called evolution of man means evolution of his consciousness. Man as a biological phenomenon belongs without a doubt to the species of mammals. Like all other higher animals, man was quite conscious about almost everything related to his material needs and his environment. In short, the conditions for his survival. He felt sure in his primitive life because he felt himself able to deal with all possible material situations. But there was one problem which he was unable to solve, which left him helpless and stunned: the problem of the deceased. Because to him they were not dead. They returned regularly to life in his dreams. They spoke to him and moved about. They demanded things or even threatened. These early tribesmen did not discriminate distinctly between their dreams and their waking states, as missionaries know who have worked among contemporary tribesmen, and as mothers know about their small children. The experience of the return of the living dead was the first problem which the man of Neanderthal and others of his state of development could not solve. They responded with dread and fear, and they reacted as they did to all and every challenge to their existence in the most practical way. They removed the dead out of sight. To prevent their return, they let them have with them all those things which might have prompted them to return. And in some cases, the skeletons have been found fettered hand and foot. Here, the consciousness of early man, which was still that of an animal, touched for the first time a world beyond, though it was merely beyond his intellectual understanding. The magic culture of the Ice Age is the first stage of further development of consciousness due to this situation. The men of this later period dared to face the fact of the living dead and to use them for practical purposes. By practicing this kind of relationship with the beyond, the magician of these groups of tribesmen developed at the same time their own sensitivity to other invisible powers and presences, which means their ESP. Some 20,000 years more, we find that they had left the Hades of the deceased, the big natural caves, and painted their magical pictures on any prominent rocks or hillsides. That can mean that they no longer relied only on the spirits of the dead, but that they had become conscious of the presence of other powerful spirits also, in the hills and trees and stones, in rivers and certain plants. Natural science has called this period the animism, which means imparting conscious life to nature. To restate briefly the facts, for millions of years, the consciousness of human beings functioned merely in sensory perceptions and in reacting to them in the same primitive ways as did the mammals, along the lines of their physical needs. As the first sign of something else, we noticed that they started to bury their deceased due to a fear of something which was beyond their control, the dream, phantoms of the dead. Really, it was a reaction to some ESP, hinting at a certain expansion of their field of consciousness. That developed rather quickly, compared with the slow pace before, into the broad magic culture, when man, or at least a certain type of man, attained to some control over his phenomena. But further expansion, this led to the period of animism. Though this world of spirits and powers was certainly to him a very real beyond, though he feared and shunned it, he was too much concerned about it, because it was still the domain of the magician only. The magician was the man appointed to deal with this beyond on behalf of the group. For even among these otherwise rather advanced tribesmen, nobody was as yet clearly conscious of himself as an individual. Everyone felt himself, and this also only as a person among and related to other persons. He had a certain idea about himself as this body, with that name, and such a position within the group. But there was no definite feeling of I in him. We can observe this state of consciousness in those few tribes of aborigines who are still living in some remote corners or reservations of this globe. The next step of development is rather surprising. After the period of animism declined, there followed a short transitional period of agriculture before an outburst of highly advanced urban civilizations in many parts of the world. For example, in Egypt, in Sumer and Akkad, in the Indus Valley. All this within a few centuries after millions and millions of years. What has happened? The brain and nervous system of the species man, the organ of his contact with absolute consciousness, had become ready for the experience of identity. He discovered a genuine reflexive feeling of a real I. With this event, man left the line of his animal ancestors. This was the birth of man. No animal knows itself as I. Millions of years, man had existed as one creature among all others out of what his surroundings had granted him. Now, he separated himself as I from all and everything else as not I, in order to rule over it. Demanding more and more from it, insatiable, he was a changed being that would change his world, finally to what it is now. Of course, this could not have been a matter of a certain date in history. It took a period of several centuries, as we mentioned already, during the so-called Stone Age. When it happened the first time that one of these tribesmen of the Stone Age became conscious of his real I, it might have happened to one of the magicians or shamans, because they were certainly always among the most advanced ones in intelligence, and more still in their knowledge of the world of extrasensory perception. However, in the course of those centuries, more and more of the group members got this knowledge of their real identity spontaneously, because the brain and nervous system of these people of the Stone Age were ready. Nevertheless, what actually happened was strange. There was the experience of a powerful, mysterious, genuine I within, timeless and spaceless. But that arose within a consciousness that until then had been occupied by a lot of objects and ideas, by feelings and thoughts, and dominated by a concept of the person and his dread of the unknown beyond. We have no evidence whether there were then and there any who confronted the new experience as the boy Venkataraman did and accepted it as it is. We know only the result, a new kind of man who had split that experience. They covered up the mysterious real I with their person and pushed the extra sensory character of the whole into the beyond as God. Thus, the birth of man happened in the shape of man and his religion. The outer evidence of that is that all those early contemporary great urban civilizations were theocracies, governments based on religions, temples, and priestcraft. Nevertheless, all this is not yet the whole of the story. Among those who got blessed with a new experience in the course of those centuries, there were some who did not cover up as completely as others the real I with their person idea. The veil which they too put between the pure consciousness of identity and their personal relative consciousness remained transparent, as it were. They tried quietly to analyze the experience. They discovered conditions by which it became possible to repeat it deliberately. They found out a state of mind which was not any more thinking, but being merely silently aware. Thus, they were able to retrace the adulteration and to return to the source of the experience and to recognize it as that which is. There are documents about this available already from the 3rd millennium BC in Egypt, testifying to the inner development side by side with the birth of civilizations. Thus, we get from the beginning two parallel lines of further development of man. The extroverts collectively creating, sustaining, and destroying one civilization after the other. And on the other side, the introverts, the saints and sages, who live their quiet and unobtrusive lives as timeless models testifying to the path of the individual to his highest destination. While the names of kings and conquerors, of scholars and priests are sunk in oblivion, the so-called evolution of consciousness continued its development in the shape of wisdom and love. About the year 1000 BC, the wisdom of the beyond exploded in the great scriptures of the cultures that were flourishing at that time. The Vedas in India, the Bible in Asia Minor, the I Ching in China. About 500 years later, there appear within a short period the master souls, teaching the truth of man. The Buddha Sakyamuni in India, Confucius and Lao Tzu, soon followed by Changxi in China, Zarathustra in Persia, the forerunners of Socrates in Greece. Should not the strikingly simultaneous events in that 6th and 5th century BC point to the fact that this was a kind of zenith in the evolution of man? 500 years later appeared Jesus Christ. Another 500 years later, Muhammad. While after another 500 years, there followed a glowing sunset. There was a glorious outburst of the highest mysticism in Christianity, as well as in Islam. Master souls taught the great experience in Zen Buddhism. The same truth was expounded in Advaita Vedanta in Hinduism. And since then, almost 1,000 years passed by without any event of a similar spiritual value. Does it mean definite spiritual decline? Let us take it rather as a hint that the time of organized, even of a collective form of worship has run out. As we shall show presently, in contemporary mankind, each individual is called upon to face the beyond with himself, without priest, without church and ceremonies, simply in his own nature, and all alone. The way he responds to the challenge decides the happiness or misery of his further life.